The 12 tapestries of the months, probably commissioned by Gian Giacomo Trivulzio for the wedding of his son, Giovanni Niccolo to Paola Gonzaga, constitute an important landmark in the history of tapestry. The series was woven in Vigevano, between around 1503 and 1508 by Benedetto from Milano and his assistants, who worked on the basis of drawings by one of the Italian painters most closely associated with perspective, Bartolomeo Suardi, known as Bramantino. The result is a work that, applying a typically Nordic technique, defines a fully Renaissance composition, distinguished by Bramantino's dreamy hyperrealist architecture. The august scene, like the others in the cycle, is enclosed by an important frame bearing the coats of arms of the Trivulzio family and the symbols of the families related to them. Above and in the center is the large coat of arms of the Trivulzio family. Within a garland, the coat of arms of the important Milanese dynasty presents a mermaid, intent on trying to scratch a diamond with a blade. The breaking of the latter becomes a clear allusion to the indestructible solidity of the patron, corroborated by the motto "Net es mai," a phonetic transliteration meaning "do not fear." On the sides, depictions of the sun appear, and Virgo, the zodiac sign of the month. The figure, quilted with stars indicating the relevant constellation, is depicted as an angel holding in his hands the caduceus, the winged staff with the two coiled serpents, linked to the representation of the god Hermes or Mercury, symbol of peace and prosperity. Below, the foreground is occupied by a splendid still life piece, an enormous quantity and variety of summer fruits, including melons, courgettes, grapes, figs, and plums. Against the backdrop of a large Renaissance square, the personification of the month is depicted in the center, seated on a throne, dressed in the antique style and crowned with vine leaves. While in his left hand he holds a cup to taste a drink, his raised right hand introduces the representations around his figure. He rests his feet on two melons, the typical fruit of the season, to refresh himself from the heat of the Po Valley. On the step of the throne, the Latin inscription reads, "August draws auspicious harvests with the rites of Bacchus. he grinds the millet and tempers the heat with fresh fruit and wine. The motto therefore announces that the entire scene is dedicated to such delicacies and their preparation and consumption. With a symmetrical division within the tapestry. The left part of the image, dedicated to consumption and the Bacchic ritual, is occupied by a scene taking place around a table, covered with a tablecloth, on which traces of a frugal meal of bread and melons remain. In which, however, wine seems to dominate. A little behind, a bearded figure also standing, holds a broken flask with his left hand, from which wine falls onto the back of a man asleep on the table. Two drunken characters face each other, unelegantly making drunken gestures. Seldom in Italian art has such an effective representation of the effects of heat and wine been seen. Indolence. Mockery. Drowsiness. Irritability. There is enough to draw from it an exhortation not to abuse wine in the summer season, but also not to take too long a break, in the month devoted to idleness, from the various agricultural tasks. The old man seated with a flask in his hand, and the naked young man sleeping, depicted in the foreground at the foot of the august throne, also seem to emphasize this aspect. Another boy, a reference to classical statuary, rests at the foot of the prosopopoeia. On the right, in antithesis, next to the last sleeping figure, are depicted various activities, starting with the manufacture of the barrels, intended to contain the new wine. Some young men, dressed in short tunics, prepare the hoops with which the staves of the barrels will be closed, and the willow branches that will be used to tie them. A seated young man shows us the stages of building a wine barrel, with the planer and willow branch lying on the floor, which is covered with a brightly colored diamond carpet. He rests his feet on a barrel, surrounded by several barrel hoops, of different sizes, with long arrow-headed strips. The ready-made barrel hoops are depicted with one of those bold perspective views dear to Bramantino. Above, the oxen, still yoked, have probably just finished threshing the millet. The presence of this cereal, after the appearance of barley in June and wheat in July, is an indication of specific attention to reality and provides us with valuable information on the crops in use in Lombardy at the beginning of the 16th century. The buildings, ordered according to a perspective composition, end in an extraordinary Renaissance architecture. It refers, with its Tiberium, to Donato Bramante's contemporary experiences in the Milanese Church of Our Lady of Graces. The architecture, with its elevation, refers back to the Trivulzios themselves, in the building of the family mausoleum in St. Nazareth, precisely to a design by Bramantino.